Welcome to the first episode of Fireside, the first Fireside podcast of all time. This is something that I've wanted to do for years, basically. I kickstarted Fireside, the group, at the heat of the polarization that was happening with the COVID era. And my background is social enterprise. So my name's Darvis Walker. For those who don't know me, I co-founded Fireside with my partner, Brittany Jane Laidlaw. And we kickstarted Fireside to create a sanctuary that enables diverse viewpoints to be heard. And my background is social enterprise. I started a company in the Tarkine at the turn of the millennium, which was designed to take the polar opposites of, the opposing forces of resource extraction, the mining industry and the forest industry, and the conservation industry, who were fighting over this 500,000 hectare ancient wild place in the northwest of Tasmania, in regard to which use was appropriate, knocking the hell out of it or protecting it for future generations. And by that stage, the conservation movement, in my view, had run out of steam. The political climate in Tasmania had become so heated, so polarized, that green politics no longer was getting the traction that it did through the Franklin era, the Franklin blockade era. And so our goal was, long story short, to provide an economic solution to a polarized situation and create a new economy in the Tarkine. And we launched Tarkine Trails and put the Tarkine on the map for the first time ever as a sophisticated tourism destination. And we ran that company for 13 years and took thousands of people on expedition journeys over the course of that time. I've run hundreds of expeditions into the wild in that corner of the world. And so during that period, the thing that became really evident to me was the power of making space to be able to navigate these heated polar opposites. And the irony for me was that my family were actually loggers from the Huon Valley in southern Tasmania. And so any Tasmanian that's been here for a period of time would know that these apparent opposites, log truck drivers and mining contractors, would never get along with someone who had conservation values. But of course, when you're sitting around the fire, you recognize the values that you share rather than the differences that you have. And so Fireside is our attempt as a social enterprise, nature culture. Fireside is nature culture's hearth, and an attempt to make space, not war, in order to navigate these complex, highly polarized and heated topics, the COVID era, and most recently, the voice to Parliament. And so it's a great pleasure that I can introduce Adam Thompson, who is an Aboriginal author. He's been an active member of the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre for, I don't know, I'll let you fill in the details on that one in a minute, mate, but 20 years or something. It's been a long time. But most importantly, Adam is a lifelong friend of mine. Adam and I grew up together, and he was the only fella that could tolerate the dysfunction of my family dynamic at the dinner table. Adam would just take the piss out of my parents and laugh, and he became loved by my family immediately, which was highly unusual. So Adam managed with his patience and his funny sense of humor to find a place in my family, and Adam and I had some wonderful times as youngsters together, including spending really precious time with my nan at Scamander. We spent a lot of time up at Scamander hanging out and riding motorbikes, and we've maintained a friendship over all of these years. So in particular, I'm inviting Adam into this space on the back of the Voice to Parliament referendum. And Adam held a viewpoint as an Indigenous Aboriginal Tasmanian, a Palawa man, that didn't fit what the media was suggesting most Aboriginal people were representing, which was the yes vote. And just for context, I do intend to bring a Palawa person onto Fireside podcast as well and interview them in regard to their position as a yes voter, and give them space to share how they feel about the situation post the referendum. So I want to throw this, I'll give you a little bit of context in terms of how this conversation is going to roll. So for the first hour, I really want to provide space for you guys to get to know Adam, and it's very chilled and informal. After that hour, I'm going to throw it over to you guys to throw out questions, because it's good and well for me just to sit here and rabbit on and ask Adam questions that, frankly, I already know the answers to in terms of what his viewpoints are. Some of them, there'll be a bunch that potentially I don't. But really, Fireside is a space for you guys as a community to be able to come with us on the journey. And as time goes on, I'm inviting you also to feed into who it is that we choose to interview going forward. So I want to throw it over to Adam now, and I'm going to attempt to manage the technology and bring Adam up into full screen or something. I don't know how to do all of this stuff. I'm just giving it a crack, really. And feel free to just have a yarn about you, man, and tell us a little bit. I guess what I'm wanting to do is just throw the talking stick to you, mate, and tell us a bit about what it's been like for you growing up as an Aboriginal fella in Launceston with me, and what your journey has been, leading up to this referendum that we had, which marked a really iconic moment in Australian history when it comes to Aboriginal relations. And I'll just jam with you, mate, and we'll keep it cash. Over to you, bro.
Sure, that sounds great. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, it's good, man.
Well, I just want to start by saying, it takes one dysfunctional family to know another, which is why I think, we gelled so well in high school.
Totally.
But look, thanks very much for having me on the podcast, and hello to all you firesiders out there listening and watching. It's a privilege for me to be here talking. I'm certainly no expert on this stuff, but I'll just I'm a grassroots man, and I'll just tell you how it is from my angle. So yeah, my name's Adam Thompson. As Darvis said, I'm a Palawa or Pakana man. Grew up in Launceston. My nan, my grandma, Elaine Beaton, she was born on Cape Barren Island in 1930, and our family was from there, lived on Badger Island, Flinders sometimes, Cape Barren, mutton birding on Babel Island and Chapel Island, and our family moved off there in the 50s when a lot of other families did. It's a bit of a, closed down the Aboriginal Reserve on Cape Barren, and it was difficult for people to live over there. Not many opportunities. The government stripped a lot of the services out of the place, and most of the people, I think about 75%, moved off the island, and most of them went to Launceston. So our families, we're from the Beaton family, and we've been in the Launceston area ever since. And I went to Queechy High School with Darvis, and when I was in my early 20s, I started working at the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. I started washing cars and just doing dog's body sort of work, and eventually got work over on the islands in Bass Strait, some of the Aboriginal-owned islands, Chapel and Badger mainly, and kind of worked my way up to kind of a ranger coordinator. And I did that, lived on the islands on and off for about 5 years. And then I eventually started doing all the admin type work from town, still going to the islands a bit. Then I left for a couple of years and went back and was offered a kind of history role, doing oral histories with elders and and collecting photos and just doing heaps of different types of admin stuff, working with the board of directors and determining Aboriginality, things like that. So, I've kind of been around in the Aboriginal services space, for 20 years, and been a community member, all my life. And yeah, I guess, I probably about 2 years ago, I was kind of writing a lot, and I had some success with a book being published. And then I guess I was kind of doing two jobs, this day job at the Aboriginal Centre and this arts kind of stuff. And so I just kind of leaned towards, the arts thing, and I quit the day job as much as I loved it. And it was a great opportunity. But, I had this kind of other stuff happening, and it enabled me to create a lifestyle that I could kind of stay home and, be my own boss and that kind of thing, and be more effective, I think, with getting messages out to the world through storytelling. So that's kind of my jam now, is like storytelling. I started a production company, a screen production company with Nathan Maynard. We're called Kudikina Productions. And I'm just writing books, making screen stuff, and that's what I do now. And that's what's led me up to this referendum.
Yeah, totally, man. One of the things I'm really interested to hear, and I'm sure these guys are really interested to hear as well, and especially for people who didn't grow up in Tassie, is your experience of, as a kid, being an Aboriginal kid, and the difference between, what that's 30 years ago that we're at high school, right? So like, what was your kind of emotional experience of being an Aboriginal person as a child, in terms of both, the social, the way that our education system and whatever acknowledges Aboriginality now versus then, it's a stark difference. So how do you, like, was there a certain point on that journey between being a kid in an era that I could genuinely say was like definitely a racist culture, between then and now? Like, what's the story there? And if that I know that that switched for you, but what were the markers along that journey?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was a pretty shy kid, and I had a pretty sheltered upbringing. Like, I don't think I would say we were privileged at all. Certainly were, compared to a lot of other families I knew. But, just a working class family, a kind of broken home. And I remember going to, having this understanding of who I was, my Aboriginality. But I remember there was one kind of moment. It was I must have been in about grade 3 or 4. And there was a big kind of, unit or whatever it's called in the curriculum about Aboriginal studies. And it seemed to go on for ages, and it was all historical. And I remember we went to the museum, and there was some sort of display, and the teacher was talking, about Aborigines having been in the past. And it was always about tribal Aboriginal people, and they were there, and now they're not there anymore. And really, I guess, perpetuating that extinction myth. And, Truganini was the kind of face of that, the last Tasmanian, which, that was a kind of view in Tassie. And I don't know how much reach that film had, The Last Tasmanian. I think it was 1978 that came out. But, it had a big reach here. And I mean, people were already kind of believing that extinction stuff, but that just really solidified it. And, I never got taken to marches and rallies when I was a kid. My mum wasn't very political. I remember seeing stuff happening and hearing about it, but I didn't get to go. And I kind of resent that, like, I've got a son now and he's 9. And ever since he was a baby, he's been on my shoulders at marches and rallies, and he gets right into it. He's been involved in dealing with our old people's remains. He's been there when we've put these stone petroglyphs back that have been in museums. He's spoken in a mic at rallies. Like, he's been in amongst it, marching up the front, yelling out proud. And I missed out on that. Like I didn't get that. And I hate that, you know, because I just know how my son will grow up and his identity will be, a lot of that will revolve around what he did when he was a kid. So I think, I mean, my identity is strong, but my son is just going to be like mad. You know, his dedication to the cause is going to be crazy because he's just been in amongst it, and he's, you know, he's really interested in that stuff. And then, you know, then you had the whole high school experience where, you know, it's really not, as you know, Darvis, you know, like, you know, I spoke up about, you know, my heritage and that, but, you know, that wasn't really kind of positive experience. I mean, you know, it's a bit of casual racism, which is cool. I mean, it can get insidious in some cases, but to me, it was just kind of endearing. You know, my mates just kind of ribbing me about being Aboriginal, and it's cool. You know, like that's what you do when you're that age. You kind of find things about each other that pisses you off, and then you use it. You know, and you kind of, you know, that's the kind of ammo that you have against your mates. And I guess I had that, but it wasn't that bad, you know. But, you know, I mean, I remember in high school, you know, a lot of my negotiated studies and things like that, I always, you know, was about Aboriginal reconciliation and literature and poetry and things like that. And I kind of think back at it, and I was really interested in that stuff, but I didn't really understand it because I didn't have much life experience. And I didn't have the same viewpoint of the world and of how Aboriginal people fit into it and how we're viewed in Australia as I do now, and about our fundamental rights. I didn't have that built into me like I do now. So yeah, it was a different experience.
That it's really good actually having this conversation in a more formal way, because whenever Adam and I catch up, it's informal. But I'm just thinking about that now, and I'm thinking about, you know, that reference of Truganini and that myth, because I remember watching that film as well. And I think it was primary school when I watched the film. You know, The Last Tasmanian, was that what it was called?
Yeah,
Last Tasmanian. And I just, you know, it just solidified in my worldview that Aboriginal people are dead in Tasmania. And that was confusing because then I, like, you know, I met you, and I think you were the first Aboriginal person I'd ever met, anyone that had identified as Aboriginal. And it was probably through, you know, dudes taking the piss that I actually was like, oh, you're Aboriginal. Okay, cool. What does that even mean? You know, and I guess the question that I've got in that is, like, how do you sense make that? What was your sense making process of, like, you're getting told this myth, but behind the scenes, you know that, you know, your mum and your gran and everyone, you know, there's this story of Aboriginality, but you're being told that you don't exist at the same time. So how do you consolidate? What was your version of consolidating that? Were you talking with your mum? Did you have anyone to talk to? Were you guys at all engaged in the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre at all in that culture? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I internalized it. I didn't really have a sounding board back then to talk about that stuff. And I mean, I was a pretty shy kid, and I wasn't one to kind of make a deal about things either when I was in primary school. I remember having a feeling like I wanted to say something to the teacher, you know, just yell out loud that they're full of shit. But I didn't. I wasn't confrontational. You know, I wasn't that sort of person. But I remember thinking, you know, what they're saying isn't right. It's not true. But at the same time, I also kind of, the images that they were showing was all about this tribal people, you know. And so looking at myself, I mean, I don't look like them. You know, they're very dark skin. They, you know, had scarification on their body and ochre in their hair. They dress differently. And the images that I was seeing, you know, I mean, I couldn't see myself in that. Do you know what I mean? So one part of me wants to say, you know, you're wrong. And then another part of me was like, you know, there is an element of our culture that is not here anymore with us. You know, there's a lot of culture that survived, absolutely, but it kind of drove home that we had lost so much in a short period of time from those old people, a way of life, traditions, religion, that intimate knowledge of nature, and growing up and having a lifestyle under the stars with all that space around you, that without the trappings of an alien society, without, not saying it was easy for those old fellas, but, that it was, I didn't have that. So, the kind of theory, the heritage I had, yeah, absolutely on that, but I'm not a tribal person living on country, practicing my culture like those old fellas were. So I was torn. You can see, this isn't simple kind of black and white stuff.
Yeah, and obviously, you've got like an emotional connection through the fact that that at a kind of level of your body, like a somatic level, that on my family's, I've got Aboriginal heritage, and it sounded like even in high school there was that passion that was like, screw you guys, that pushback energetically, which is super cool even at that stage, because you're a kid, you've got no broader context other than, well, they're saying that these dudes are all dead, but they're part of my family. So that means we're not all dead, and that's confusing, because there was all of the racism in the Tasmanian context. I mean, one of the things that I do remember is the half breed and the quarter breed and the, all of that stuff. That was massive. And so what sort of made the leap? You talk about making a transition to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. So like academically, when did you start to rationally link the significance of Aboriginal culture with the knowledge that you've got that as a family? When did you start to go, okay, where did the education come? Was it through high school? Was it through college? When did that first seed get planted? Actually, this culture is incredible. Like, what motivated the passion to even get to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre and start? Who did you meet? Like, why did you go to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, going to the TAC was a long way down the path. Like, even though I was talking about, looking at these images of these old tribal fellas, I still had my family, and so, and it's the same with many of us. We have our family, our great uncles and aunties and grandparents and people like that who who are our elders, and they have so much knowledge and a way of growing up that's even different than ours. And I mean, it all goes back to kind of the history of where we come from. So most of Tasmanian Aboriginal people today, contemporary people, come from women from the northeast of Tassie that were taken or abducted or coerced by these sealers and taken over to the Bass Strait Islands, where they kind of cohabited, whether that was deliberate or rape or whatever, or just loving relationship. And our families were kind of originated from there. They were the kind of founding of our families, those people. And so, I've got stories in my family and connection. Like I said, my grandma, born over there, lived on Badger Island and knew all those old people. And my grandmother's grandfather, old Walter Beaton, like he's an amazing character, And I look at images of him, and like he's really dark, and he's just this really interesting man who had a mutton bird shed. He was really quiet and just a beautiful old man. And so we've got all these figures that we connected to and that we know. So even though I didn't have this kind of deep connection with these tribal people, those people are from my family that lived in the islands. I do have a connection with. So that was always there. And as I grew older, I understood more and more the significance of that. And I understood, I kind of, you come out of your own world and your own head as you grow up. At first, your first part of your life, it's just all about you and everything. And then you start to understand around you and the people around you. And I guess, to me, it was kind of like, late primary school, high school, that I really started to form a really good picture of where I was from and my heritage and that kind of stuff. Like there's always been an awareness of being Aboriginal, but really understanding it and all that started coming through there. And I remember in high school going over to Flinders Island and staying with my Auntie June in the school holidays. And Atsic was around then, and she was in the regional council, and she'd share all of this stuff with me, all of this work that she was doing. And I was so proud of her. You know, she was an elected member of the Aboriginal Regional Council, and she was important, and she was going to all these meetings. And I was like, wow, you know, like, and I was really inspired by that. And it was really kind of intoxicating because, you know, my auntie, she was speaking as an Aboriginal person, making decisions about our people to the best of her ability. And I really wanted to kind of, you know, be able to do that one day. And I think after that time I spent with her over there, I didn't look back, you know, and every opportunity I had, I kind of took it. And then the rest is kind of history with my story, you know. I've been able to do that myself, and I'm very honored and proud to be able to do that. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, man, totally. One of the things, so, you know, to fast forward the story a little bit, is your journey through, but that's obviously been the kind of the motivational trigger, that family constellation, you know, your relationship with your family and the pride that's brought in your culture, and going to Flinders and meeting your auntie and looking back across the history of your mutton birding in your family. And, you know, I know you've done huge amounts of that over the years, taking community over there. How's that, you know, like, and that's gone on to inform your relationship with the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, which, for those of you guys who don't know, it's my understanding that kind of the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre is, and you can correct me on all of this stuff, mate, but politically seen as the kind of, you know, I can feel myself walking on a tender wire even bringing this up, but seen as the politically correct go-to place due to the rigor via which the TAC requires someone to go through in order to validate their Aboriginality. And so you've associated yourself with an Aboriginal body that is kind of like the go-to for, you know, for politicians in terms of policy and stuff in the state. And what was the journey through there in terms of what's, you know, you've got this somatic passion, and then how did that unfold for you once you got into the TAC and you've sort of made your way through? Where did you find you in that? Where did you find you?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, an organization like the TAC is the logical next step for someone in my position back then, you know, where you have this passion and this interest, and you have been a bit frustrated about connecting, you know, with community through your own family, and then suddenly, you know, there's not suddenly, sorry, then you become associated with an organization that's got, and I'll say, you know, 50 years now, 50 years. So this year is the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. And it's the only organization that's been around that long. And it's the only organization that's consistently advocated for the rights and interests of Aboriginal people in Tasmania and across Australia. And so, you know, it was fantastic to go in and work for the TAC, because, you know, I was hungry for knowledge and for understanding, and to have Aboriginal leaders like Michael Mansell and Heather Sculthorpe and other people that are so approachable and so committed to, you know, uh, teaching and sharing knowledge with younger people. It was just intoxicating,
Yeah.
and it was fantastic, you know. And I was hungry, you know, and hungry to not only for knowledge in that, but I was hungry to do my bit. You know, I was seeing, and I had seen all my life these people, you know, out there doing radical stuff, you know, advocating, pursuing our interests, you know, politically and culturally, and I wanted to be part of that. Like, I just was so keen to march the streets and so keen to be radical too, and kind of and make powerful statements as an individual and as a community member. And so that all that was there, and all of this kind of theoretical stuff about self-determination and sovereignty, and, you know, the Aboriginal political government, and I was just hungry, and I just soaked all that stuff up. You know, it was just, yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the good thing about the TAC, you know, whenever they kind of, you know, encounter community members with that hunger, they embrace them. And so, you know, you're kind of given opportunities, and you're allowed to run. They give you a rope, and you just run with it and see where it takes you. And you know, you discover your limits after a while, and everyone kind of settles in. And it was fantastic. Really great organization to work for. You don't feel like, you know, I've never felt like I was working for a boss. Always that I was working for my own community. But you know, that's my story with the TAC, and I'm a TAC person, and the center, you know, and I've been, you know, selected by, you know, the board of the TAC at one stage to go and bring home the remains of my ancestors that were in museum in Britain. And the TAC have been fighting for years to get those things back, and still do. So all this tireless work by that organization to pursue our interests, it's just a marvel. And 50 years of that. And people say, you know, oh, the TAC is hostile, the TAC is political, but the TAC is just highly principled and staunch, and that is exactly what we need from an organization in these times. And their stance on Aboriginality, which is often what people see as the biggest kind of difference between the TAC and other organizations, is the TAC in our community, we care about the authenticity of our people. And if there's fellas out there who aren't Aboriginal, who claim they are, they're not going to be part of it. And we gatekeep that for a reason, because it's about authenticity, you know. And we're not going to have we're not going to be questioned, you know. Our old fellas, and I don't talk about tribal people, but our elders back in the 70s marched the streets for land rights, and it was just as much about identity back then, because that the extinction myth was highly prevalent at the time. And so, you know, they were marching for identity. And they were getting spat on and treated like shit from people in the street, but they had the guts to get out there and say, "Oh, we're Aboriginal, and we want land back." So, you know, that's where we come from. And, you know, at the moment, unfortunately, we're kind of under attack by the state government and all these kind of groups of fakes who claim to be Aboriginal. And yeah, but, you know, we're highly principled, and yeah, I've got nothing but good things to say about the TAC and my community. I'm very proud of them.
Yeah, and it comes through so strong, mate. It's come through so strong. Your passion is evident, and I'm sure it's evident to everyone here. One of the things that I want to touch on, a little bit of the irony in a moment, in terms of, you know, because basically how you come across to me in regard to your Aboriginality and is, you know, incredibly progressive. That you're a, like, in your language, a staunch advocate for the growth and the thriving of your community. And I know that we'll get to the vote, and I'll come back to this point. And I know that you voted no, and we'll come back to this. But the polarized, collapsed narrative of the no vote is in terms of the way that I see it, in terms of the media and the way that the media has portrayed the no vote, it's portraying it on the back of, conservative politicians that are that you could genuinely say, oh God, it's pretty edgy the way that you're talking about Aboriginal culture. A whole bunch of conservative politicians that I've looked at in regard to the no vote were, also referencing what they felt to be insane in regard to treaty. There's no way we're ever going to go through a treaty process. And I personally voted no, but I'm a massive advocate for treaty. And I don't want to go into that now because I want that space to be yours. But I see a lot of irony there, and I'll come back to that point in a moment. But the other thing that's really incredibly complex in Aboriginal culture is this tug of war over what legitimizes Aboriginal identity. And it's in my mind, I'm happy to be challenged and be challenged by anyone in here respectfully. That's the mantra. This is a respectful space for diverse viewpoint. I cannot see an argument, and I'm open to seeing one, that can legitimize a claim for Aboriginality without the willingness to have, a genetic test to get, a blood sample and go, cool, I've got Aboriginal. It's either I've got Aboriginal blood or I don't biologically, full stop. I can understand why there'd be some pushback to that. But from a fundamental essentials perspective, I reckon if I was tossing and turning in regard to the legitimacy of my Aboriginality, I just take the test. So I know that's a real hornet's nest in terms of us opening up that conversation. And I want to point out to the community, the Fireside community, how complex Tasmanian Aboriginal culture is, which I then think that complexity feeds back into a lot of the substance from what I interpret your no perspective to be as well. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So I'm just putting a pin in those 2 points.
Okay.
In complexity and irony. So when we get to the voice piece, because I'm aware we've got 30 minutes left before we throw it out to the crew to throw some questions in. So your TAC experience has informed so much about your culture. You've found yourself, I guess in a place of belonging. You found your belonging. It's like, this is my mob, this is my people, and you can explore your sense of identity through that organization and all of the resources that come with it. And then you jumped ship, and now you're writing books. And tell us about that.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, I wouldn't say I jumped ship. I mean, I kind of went a bit different direction, and I guess, but I'm still very much amongst it with the TAC. I'm a member of the organization. I have the same value system. Yeah. I regularly go in there. I'm always be a part of that place. And, I would work there again.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I went a different direction, and I kind of felt, and that's kind of Darvis. That's the kind of the way I've kind of found myself operating, throughout my life. I kind of might spend, up to 10 years doing something, and I kind of want to do something different. I can't just stay in the same thing. So, it was never a planned thing. It's just this other element of me grew, this kind of creative part of me that just needed to escape. And it's kind of hard with creativity, like to be within the bounds of an office and a schedule and that kind of stuff, So really, to explore my creative side further through writing and art, I had to, be free of the routine and that kind of thing that comes with an office job. That wasn't I wanted to ditch the organization. It's just I needed a kind of different space to work from.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the other bit?
Yeah. So what are you doing now, man? What are you doing? Tell us what you're doing. You're writing.
Yeah.
You've got so many projects on the go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of guess, with our community and with our campaigns, we've always kind of operated pretty similarly. We have a pretty heavy presence in the media. We use news media and that kind of thing. And now we're using social media. We regularly have meetings with politicians. We put forward our view. We make representations to things, that kind of stuff. But our community has a history of this creative element, and back in like 70s, 80s, 90s, there was a lot of like people like Karen Brown and Jim Everett, and other people in the community. They were writing and creating poetry that was edgy and political and hard hitting, and theatre, community theatre, stuff like that. And then there seemed to be a little bit of a lull for a while, and then the last 10 years, it's kind of popped up again in a big way, and especially lately. With Nathan Maynard and his success in theatre, and we've got several people in the acting space and other parts of screen, and heaps of stuff. And so, I guess we've found a way to get our stories and our themes and our messages across to the general public in a way that is through entertainment. It's, people get sensitized to things, like think back to how the Greens and the conservationists used to be in the media time. Yeah. And it was effective for a while, but eventually people kind of just switch off from that and they see it. Yeah. But they just get sensitized. Yeah. So I guess, when it comes to literature, most people are reading a book when they're relaxed and they might be in bed and there's entertaining and they've paid for the book, hopefully. And, and they're reading this stuff and they're taking it in with their defenses down, because it's in the form of entertainment. So I guess we found another avenue to try and work on the public, work on our messages, and we do it in connection with all of these other formats, all of these other campaigns. So it's kind of doing the same thing, but just on a different angle, Yeah. So that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. How's that expressing itself at the moment? Like, what's your current project? I know that you've just been down. We were talking. Okay, someone's writing from Tim Walker. Adam's book is born into this. Nice one. Feel free to throw out comments, guys. That's actually really helpful. Just if you've got stuff that's coming up, we won't necessarily be able to answer immediately. But so you were just down at the that Queenstown Festival, the Arts Festival. What was that called again?
Unconformity.
Yeah, it looked awesome.
Yeah. That was great, and I'm a big fan of Unconformity.
Yeah.
And, that's the other thing too, with this writing stuff, it gives you a voice through the work, but it also gives you a voice outside of that, ever since, it elevates your profile and people invite you to things, invite you to speak. And it's another way to kind of get our messages across to people, even through this kind of thing, Darvis, So, it's been great. I mean, I don't want to be preachy and I don't want to, be ranting at people and trying to bombard people with messages. But, when you get an opportunity to speak, I mean, why not?
Yeah.
Like the TAC does, we're always agitating, always pursuing our interests. And I guess I am too.
Yeah.
Through that, through the kind of profile that you develop.
Well, in many ways, like the books are a form of nuance where you can present your values and your goals in terms of personal and cultural. But like when you get a space like a podcast, you can come in and just shoot from the hip and speak straight in terms of what you feel and what you believe. And I kind of feel like as time goes on, the culture that we find ourselves in is finding it hard to, like, the compass of morality is pretty vague, and the compass of principles and values is pretty vague. So I actually find myself, when you speak with that sense of, like in your language, staunch, I find that very attractive, because I'm like, yeah, principles, like values, like we're losing principles and values in our world. And when I hear someone represent themselves with a non-apologetic not a polarizing, because I don't feel like you're polarizing at all, but I don't feel like you're apologetic about those principles. And I personally, that feels really magnetic to me. It doesn't repel me. And even if those values were completely different to mine, I don't think it would repel me. I'd still respect that there's an undercurrent of something with substance that's driving the work and the passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and it's the same with, other people that do what I do, from my community. Like every decision you make, we have to make a values-based decision.
Totally.
I'm constantly bombarded, with requests for people to do this, to do that. Will you do this work for me? Will you do that? And the first thing I have to say to myself is, does that sit within my principles?
Yeah.
I'm always answerable to my community, and how are they going to respond to doing what I'm doing? So even though, you might have these kind of values that are kind of personal to you, I have to adhere to a communal set of values or
Yeah.
protocol, if you like, um, that I subscribe to because I'm part of that community. And even if I don't personally agree with that, if my community does overwhelmingly, then that's what I do. That's what is being a community is.
Yeah, totally.
I have, and at the same time, it's reciprocal because
Mm,
I can tell the stories of my community through my work, and I have
mm,
license to do so because I make values based decisions, and I respect the communal nature of this stuff, and so
yeah.
I'm allowed to tell these stories. And if towards the end of this, you want to talk a bit more about Aboriginality, there's a really
Mm,
good point about that, about speaking as an Aboriginal person.
mm. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So we'll put a little flag in that toward the end. One of the things that just popped up for me there, we've got 20 minutes left before we go into the Q&A, so we've still got a bit of time. Maybe we leave 15 for the voice for you and I, just to jam that out a bit, is you being beholden to your community. Like, so if we just sort of grab that as a little take, that little piece that you just did then, it's so juicy, mate. It's so good, because that is what most of Western culture is completely bereft of. A sense of uh, connection and belonging to a culture that I'm proud of, and a community that I'm proud of, that's underpinned by values, that's underpinned by a sense of morality. Clearly, some people find that in religion. I don't, whilst I respect enormously that people find that in religion, I don't have a community oriented around religion. And the penny drop for me, it's a big part of why I'm forging Fireside, is that I don't want to perpetuate my own worldviews at the cost of not being accountable for them. So,
Yep.
like, the way that I represent myself in this space, there's now 1,000 people in this group, and I'd love it to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, is me being very mindful to walk my talk and not start to polarize and become some freaking know-it-all, some dude with a freaking messiah complex because I've got like social media influence or whatever. I don't want that. I don't want large amounts of people following me. Actually, that's what I want, is to be part of a community of people that collectively sense make in terms of these big topics, and where my own worldview is moderated by a nature-informed culture. So the thing that's really inspiring to me about this Fireside space is that people that are coming in, loosely speaking, it won't be applicable for everybody because people can join thousands of groups or whatever, but we've got pretty strong guidelines for coming in, are motivated by respect, motivated by self-responsibility, motivated by the desire to make a sanctuary for the complex range of human emotions and viewpoints. And for me, this feels like a salve to the chaos and the polarization of the world. So that really, really, that was like a bit of a penny drop moment for me. I was like, oh yeah, that's totally. I don't have that culture that you've got. In that sense, I'm quite envious. And so I feel like we need to forge that, like cultures that are informed by shared values. I think it's super important.
Yeah. Yeah, I really admire and respect what you're doing with Fireside, and the talks that we've had about it, and the most recent one when we were out on country together. And I admit it took me a while to kind of get what you're trying to build and create and nurture with Fireside, and I get it. It's really cool, and and I wanted to be part of it too, and and that's, I guess, it's becoming a community in itself with its own, and it'll organically kind of form with its own rules and protocols as well, that
Totally.
people can be proud of, and gives people agency.
Totally. So let's zoom to the voice. You voted no, Adam. What happened, mate? You didn't. You weren't looking.
I might shave my head and look like Peter Dutton. I've shaved my head and eyebrows.
You're a bloody racist, Adam. You voted no, mate. So I
did.
I guess I could say that my into this space. These microphones are weird. I can feel like it's clipping a bit, but is that clearly the voice to Parliament has been represented in a very black and white way. If you vote yes, you're a good person, and you're motivated by virtues. And if you vote no, this is a brushstroke generalization, you're mostly speaking motivated by oppression, continuing like a systemic racism narrative. You're motivated by fear if you vote no. That's the kind of the cliched media take on it. And there are a bunch of media organizations that are doing a lot better job than that polarized brushstroke attempt to communicate what the voice to Parliament is. But what's your story with the voice to Parliament, mate? Why did you, because this is where you said, I've come back to this point, the progressive irony. In that article in the Examiner, you spoke as representing a progressive no, like that you're coming from a progressive perspective with your no.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was a no, and it was a difficult, thing and a horrible ordeal, this referendum. In that, the Australian people were presented with something that they were told would make a difference to Aboriginal people. And, I know a lot of people have a healthy distrust of government, but a lot of people don't either as well. And so this was presented as being something that was going to be beneficial to Aboriginal people. So, the fact that, black fellas, Aboriginal people were saying no to it would be confusing to them. The fact that it didn't go through, that the no's won, would have been terribly disheartening for yes voters who wanted to, really to contribute to something, to do something for Aboriginal people. So I feel terrible about that. When the no vote came through, I wasn't like, cheering and happy. It wasn't a happy occasion. It should never have eventuated. But voting yes wouldn't have been something that would have made it sit right for me. So I was a progressive no, what we call a progressive no, and I cannot. I went to some great speaking events with some Tasmanian Aboriginal people who were much more intelligent than me. Really put forward some really good arguments about it, and I listened to a lot of the debate. But I was always going to be a no, a progressive no. So, there's a couple of reasons why. I guess the first is that this kind of fundamental thing, like that Aboriginal people make up about 3% of the total Australian population. So 97% roughly of the people voting in the referendum were white or non-Aboriginal. I wouldn't say white, non-Aboriginal people. So I felt like, why should 97% of the population of non-Aboriginal people be voting, making a decision about Aboriginal people being able to have a voice to Parliament? Like, I know that it was to do with the Constitution and that's how it has to go, but why is that? Why do white people have to give us a kind of approval to be able to talk to a white government, to their government? I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, it's just stupid. It should never have been put up. It's offensive. The other reason I voted no was because we're voting on a voice to Parliament. Okay. So currently, I do this, call up a politician, make an arrangement to have a meeting. I go along and I present something to them. It might be, we want this bit of land back, or we don't agree with this. And politicians say yes, or they say no, or there's some negotiation. That exists now. And as a grassroots Aboriginal person, I can go and do that. I can talk to them. And it's been quite effective in the past. We've had, we had 12 parcels of land returned in 1995, and we've had a couple since then. And yes, things have stalled at the moment, but that's because of a hostile government. But my point is that we already have a voice to government. We can already go to Parliament. There's several members of Parliament, Aboriginal people in federal Parliament. That already exists. Why do we need to have a referendum to create what we already have? When if the Australian people are being presented an opportunity to do something for Aboriginal people, why couldn't it have been something of substance? Why couldn't that have been something that would be beneficial to Aboriginal people? And they cherry-picked this voice to Parliament, this voice from the Uluru Statement of the Heart, which also mentions a treaty that we have been calling for time and time again, year after year, a treaty. Yeah. Opportunity to settle a whole bundle of issue. Some people ask, well, what's a treaty? Okay, well, it's negotiable. But a treaty could involve something like seats in Parliament, so designated Aboriginal seats in the federal and state Parliament, yeah. Could involve all of the Crown lands being returned to Aboriginal people. Not freehold land, not people's houses and properties, nothing like that, just the Crown land. It could involve Aboriginal people having a percentage of the gross domestic product. So a kind of bunch of financial resources that to go along with managing our country and our affairs. Those are just a couple of things that could be negotiated and created within a treaty.
Yeah.
What that does is it provides an opportunity for self-determination. So the opportunity for Aboriginal people to be in charge of our own destiny. We have our own funds. We don't have to go to government cap in hand wanting this grant and that grant. We have our own funds to manage, in perpetuity. We have we have a legacy to pass on to our children, our families. We can, tribal laws can be considered and used. There could even be the generation of a Aboriginal state. And Michael Mansell talks about that in his book. My shelf over there. So, there's so much that could have been done. That can be done. But it was never put up as that. So that's why I voted no in principle, because it was meaningless. The government weren't relinquishing any power, so we weren't gaining any power. It was just a nothing vote going nowhere, hundreds of millions of dollars wasted that could have gone into a treaty, something with substance for Aboriginal people.
Great. That sets a bit of the scene. I'll just throw a couple of pieces to you, mate, and then we'll throw it open to the crew to let people throw some questions out themselves, to let the Fireside mob throw some questions out. So I've just got a couple. So just as a bit of a steel man to kind of push back, like, because I think the thing that really forms a well-rounded viewpoint is respectful counterpoint. And I mean, even though I voted no, if I steel man the yes vote, and get behind it, what I mean by that is get behind it and fully go, okay, let's have a crack at understanding the values and the virtues of the yes vote. I can see plenty of values and virtues in the yes vote. I can see plenty, like, and so the off the cuff thing that I'll say is that this situation is actually that it was actually an incredibly complex referendum, because there's so much going on. And so my no vote wasn't oriented around a complex intellectual understanding of both ends of the argument. I gave it a good crack, and I've got a pretty good noggin. But ultimately, I ended up voting based on an instinct, to be honest with you. And I actually made a little YouTube piece that I'll post sometime soon about that. And that's another story altogether. But I can see that there's perceived value from the community in the voice to Parliament at a federal level, representing a massive foot up for federal pieces of legislation that enable Aboriginal mob across the country, rather than having to fight state by state, to get a foot up in regard to, it might be royalties that are coming off the back of mining operations. It could be treaty. It could be treaty. Like, is there value in, like, at a national level, given that the advisory board is, pinned to the Constitution, and that there's a lot more they can pack. The advisory board can support Aboriginal culture at a federal level to pack a much bigger punch. So I'll throw that to you. Is that a valid viewpoint in your world?
Look, to be honest, I don't really think so. I think it was presented that way. But what I also see, Darvis, is I see, the voices taking a voice. So once you have established a voice process and certain individuals, people, representatives who are that voice, they're almost like a middleman or a middle body. What happens is if kind of regular old Joe Blow like me or somebody, grassroots person, then wants to go and see a federal politician or whatever about an issue, that won't happen. It'll be blocked. And they'll say, well, you've got to go through the process. You've got to go to your voice member, and then they'll come to us.
Yeah.
So you have this kind of this lack of contact between, grassroots people and Parliament and parliamentaries because of this voice body. And the representatives that you have for your area might not, well, one, they might not be legit. They might be affiliated with some sort of dodgy organization. There's a lot of difficult stuff to navigate in terms of conflicts between different groups and things like that. So I just see it as being very flawed and kind of fraught with, this kind of icky, situations that could develop really easily. And it irked me terribly to be voting no alongside, this right wingers, and even Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine. I mean, their arguments were just ridiculous. About we can't have it being divisive and that kind of thing, like, just ridiculous arguments. And I felt, terrible voting alongside them, but that's why we were a progressive no. We're progressive because we want to create a better future for our community. We want change, but just not through this process. It's not going to be effective. It's a waste of time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the things when we went up into the Highlands the other day that you said, and I hadn't thought about it until you said it, that you see it as the big risk being a bypass of grassroots community groups that are at the coalface of the issue. Suddenly it's bypassed to how many members would there be, like in the how many Tasmanian Aboriginal mob would be on the the advisory board? Was that even clarified?
Yeah, and I'll give you a good example of how this stuff shuts down conversation. So, you remember before this Voice to Parliament stuff, there was that Recognise campaign about constitutional recognition. So that lasted a couple of years, and then this has lasted a couple of years. So in all of that time, there has been no other healthy debate about Aboriginal politics or anything within Australia, because every time you go to kind of talk about this stuff, it's shut down. Oh no, we're only focusing on the Voice right now. Yeah. And so even if the Voice had got through, there would have been a fair bit of time taken to set that up and it to be enacted. And so we're talking about a huge chunk of just precious time is wasted without any other debate about Aboriginal politics or Aboriginal issues in Australia because of this Voice thing. It's completely been shut down.
100%. Look, I think it's time, because we made a promise to get to the crew, and we're 5 minutes overdue. So super bloody complex topic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw it out to you guys. I'll bring us up onto the gallery screen. I mean, I don't even know what you can see, to be honest with you. I don't know if you're seeing Adam in full screen. Are you guys seeing Adam in full screen, or are you seeing it in a gallery, or is that just up to you?
Is that me?
No, yeah, like how the rest of people are seeing you. Doesn't really matter. But so what I want to do is throw an invitation out to you guys who are left on this call to, number one, to tune in with how you feel in regard to this topic. Irrespective of whether you voted no or you voted yes, I really feel like the Jedi training ground that's necessary for our culture is to be able to identify, like, what does this trigger in me? Take responsibility for what it triggers in me, rather than me projecting what it triggers in me onto somebody else. So if, for example, in this space, you said you're a staunch yes, it's 100% welcome here. 100% welcome. But what I will say is that if that staunch yes comes with a whole bunch of finger pointing and whatever, that's not welcome. We've got guardianship of this space, and the guardianship is oriented around mutual respect. And I'm staunch about the values of respecting another's viewpoint, irrespective of how much emotional loading you carry in response to it, because that cannot be pointed to an individual. That emotional loading is complex, and you absolutely have my compassion if you feel really loaded about this. But please take responsibility for how you feel. So I'm going to throw us up to anyone that feels to throw out a question to Adam. We've got half hour. And to invite you to throw that question out, try to be succinct. And what we're not going to do is go into a sophisticated debate. That's not what this is about. You've got a question, and after you throw your question in, I'm gonna press mute so that we can pass it around a little bit and let people have a bit of a jam in regard to what their own viewpoints on this stuff are. We really want to get a diverse range of viewpoints, and the most diplomatic way that I can do this is pretty much say, whoever gets your hand up first is in. Go. Oh, and it's Annette. Awesome. So, and then there's Loretta, and cool, got it. We'll go Loretta next, and we're just going to do the best that we can, guys. I don't have a magic wand to make this work in the most efficient way, and Michelle's keen as well. All right, I've queued up you guys, and I'm not going to pay attention to hand signals until the next bit. And there's Britt with a blue block of glasses on. Okay, so we're going to go to Annette, and feel free to throw in a question or whatever you're thinking about the topic. All right. Ask to unmute. Let's go. Okay, so I think...
Sorry, I think I was unmuted and you muted me.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So I'm going to throw it over to you now.
Thanks, Darvis and Adam. I voted no, and it was really hard, agonizing, but I won't get into that. But the question I have is, because that kind of saved me afterwards, because I felt really ill about the whole thing. And I had a thought that if they had come up with a more progressive suggestion, if it had, maybe not treaty, but if it had been a proper progressive voice, or some kind of, I'm not quite sure what that would have looked like, but if it would have been something more braver that would have gone further, then progressive no voters would have potentially voted yes. And I don't know what the figures are, but that kind of, I thought if they had reached higher, then it might have come through. What do you think? Because I've got no feeling for, because there's never been any polling on percentage of people who are intending to vote no because of progressive issues. Like progressive no was never counted anywhere. So that's my question.
Great question.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know enough about kind of voting stats and what people are saying to know. And some people say, oh, well, you know, if people voted no to this, then there's no way they would have voted yes to a treaty. And I don't know if that's true either. I mean, maybe Australia's not ready for that yet. Maybe they are. One thing that could have happened is, instead of it being an advisory body, if that voice to Parliament wasn't advisory and what they're putting forward to government was binding advice, that would have been something that we would have voted yes on. Like I said, you know, the government weren't ever relinquishing any power with this. So we weren't you can't gain power without someone else relinquishing it. And that's what was happening here. Had they said, well, we'll create a voice to Parliament, and the advice that you give us, we have to follow, yeah, that would have given us some power. You know, that would have given us some self-determination. But it wasn't the case. Look, you know, how it could have gone, what if, you know, I don't really know the answers to those things, but you know, there was a lot of confusion about what the voice really was, and there was a lot of Aboriginal people saying we don't want this. So there's heaps of confusion, and it was a real minefield. Like it would have been difficult for the average Australian to try and formulate a kind of informed response to the referendum. I had heaps of people like messaging me, like some of my non-Aboriginal friends, just wanting to know what to do, wanting to understand it, and to the point where I just wouldn't respond anymore, I guess, because, you know, it's just overwhelming for me. But look, I don't know how it could have been any different.
Thanks, mate. And thanks, Annette. I thought that was a fantastic question. And I just wanted to quickly say that I voted no, and I'm a staunch advocate for treaty. Passionate. So I thought that was a fantastic question. To keep it balanced here, something that I'm super dedicated to is to make sure that I've got Michelle, Loretta and Michelle, but I want to get some yes voters. And I don't know if we've got any, to be honest. So I just want to get it, and please feel free to put your hand up if you're a yes voter. You're getting no judgment from us in any way, shape, or form. Michelle, fantastic. And what about Loretta? Were you yes or no? No?
And from my end, you know, I'm not interested in belittling or challenging anyone who voted yes. No. Absolutely, it's a respectful conversation. Yeah,
100%. And I think everyone can get that about you already, mate. That's why we have a big lead in. Okay, so maybe what we do first, did anyone else, I think maybe we go to Michelle, then go to Loretta. Did anyone else in the space feel comfortable that voted yes to put their hand up? Because I want to give a balanced cross-section. Otherwise, we're just existing in a vacuum. And that's not intelligent. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to go to Michelle first, and then we go to Loretta. Now you'll have to unmute yourself. I'll ask to unmute. Maybe I can do that. Let's see. Ask to unmute. Or just unmute, I don't know. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha.
Just wanted to thank Adam and Darvis and everyone for tonight. I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say. For me, I voted yes because I saw it as a stepping stone to treaty. Also, as an environmental activist, I've done a lot of like legislation and legal work, and have brought some legislation through the High Court. And so I have a bit of a bias towards challenging the legal system and the structure. But obviously, this issue is far more than a legal system. It's actually people's lives and feelings. So I totally respect that. For me personally, I feel a sadness for the complexity and the negative things that came out of it. But I'm also have totally let go of that reality because that's now done. And I'm just interested in hearing what Indigenous people have to say. And supporting them in the decision making that they want to do. And like, you know, is it even my job to be supporting someone in their decision making? It's kind of whatever decision someone makes is their decision. So I kind of saw the voice as opportunity to hopefully hand power back so they could make their own decisions and not have to. And I also saw it as an opportunity because there's such a lack of dialogue around these issues. And I kind of feel like the only way to change is through like open dialogue and understanding. So like on the more kind of positive note, because I did have concerns as well. Like I did have concerns around it. The third section of the Constitution, they were recommending her concerns. But I also felt, well, this is a stepping stone to creating more concrete dialogue. And like, you know, the mining companies, they all have advisory boards. They're all pushing there's like 20-something advisory boards. And most of them are like corporately orientated.
Yeah. I'm just gonna jump in there quickly, Michelle, just to see if you can summarize all of that up into a question that you can handle to Adam. So
okay, sorry.
No,
okay,
it's
question
awesome.
I'm most
awesome questions.
Okay, one question. I'm just interested in how the treaty, like, well, what are the basic concepts of what the treaty would be, if that's being defined, and also how that relates across different Indigenous groups. But I also feel like it's none of my business. So
no, but it's cool. You're in pondering, and I think it's awesome.
Yeah, part of me is like that, and part of me goes, "It's not my business, make those decisions."
Yeah. No, I appreciate the humility. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I literally put my hand up before just to go thumbs up to everyone, and I wasn't going to put my hand up anymore.
Well, well done. Thanks for sharing your voice. Awesome.
That's enough from me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for your support too. You know, like I guess one thing that opportunity the referendum has provided is for people to give their support to Aboriginal people through a yes or no vote. And like you said, you know, it's brought out a lot of positive stuff, and it's also exposed a lot of racism, unfortunately. And I think it's left everyone feeling a bit icky, you know, whichever way you voted and what the outcome's been. And there's a lot of people kind of in response to the Aboriginal aspiration of wanting a treaty, you know, who have said, well, look, this could be a stepping stone to a treaty. And, you know, yeah, I've heard that a lot. I mean, Albanese did say that it wasn't a stepping stone to a treaty. So he indicated that. And like what I got back to, like historically, you know, these kind of referendums to do with Aboriginal stuff don't come around very often. So in many ways, you know, having a referendum for this voice has really kind of killed a referendum for a treaty in perhaps our lifetime, or you know, the kind of the future, the shorter future. But the thing is, the positive part of that is that we don't need a referendum to have a treaty. You know, that can be legislated, and the scrutiny of the Australian people can be bypassed by the Parliament just passing a treaty bill. So that's really, Parliament taking leadership and saying, we're not going to put this to the Australian people. We're going to take leadership and act on Australia's behalf and enact a treaty as the government of this country.
Yeah.
So, that can happen. We don't need a referendum. So wouldn't have been a stepping stone in my view. In fact, it's kind of killed the opportunity in a way.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I wanted to throw it over. Thanks, mate. Thanks, Julie. And I'm going to throw it over to Loretta now. If you want to unmute yourself there, Loretta, and go for it.
Hi, Adam. Thank you very much. I've got notes so that I don't go off track here. And I just wanted to say that I voted no. And I felt sick in the stomach about it, actually, because to be honest, I didn't feel that I had the right to be voting on the future of Indigenous people. I actually felt like a colonial dictator, to be honest. It just made me feel really sick about it. And also too, I was worried that I wasn't quite sure how it would look like when there's all, different groups, and how one voice could speak for all those groups. And I thought that there may have been like a hijacking of Indigenous rights. Maybe some groups could have been left out while others, succeeded more. So I sort of felt that, that how would that have looked like under a voice? I read the Uluru Statement, and there was a lot of underpinning there that talked about a lot of UNDRIP, so the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on, can that be, could that work? Could that declaration actually help and benefit the Indigenous Australians groups around Australia? Would that have? Is that something?
Was that clear for you, Adam? I'm interpreting you talking, saying, did you get that, mate? Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So,
awesome.
Loretta, are you talking about the UN's Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? Yeah. Well, so Australia is a signatory to that. And it kind of sits in the background as this kind of standard. And if you've read it, it's got some really good stuff. But the problem is Australia doesn't abide by those principles, as do many countries that are signatories to these things. They do so in theory, but they don't follow through. You know what I mean? And there's not really many processes to hold them accountable to that. So yeah, even though that declaration sits there, it doesn't seem, in my view, to be that effective.
Yeah. I was going to say, for me, that seems like the pushback with Brexit was all oriented around the EU being 10,000 million miles removed from the grassroots of what's actually going on the ground, and a whole stack of unelected bureaucrats that are making decisions on the basis of a sovereign country. Feels similar to how you just responded to that, mate.
Yeah. Like for example, I can't quote it exactly, but the UN Declaration to the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has clauses or sections in it that talk about the rights of Indigenous peoples to hunt and gather and fish on their own lands. And I went up to Cradle Mountain and not long ago, and there was a new building there at Dove Lake, and it had I walked in, and then big kind of lettering etched in on this concrete wall, it says always was, always will be. And as we know, that's the kind of catch cry of Aboriginal land. Mm-hmm. And yet I talked to people high up in parks not long before that and said, oh, look, when I go up to Cradle Mountain, can I make a fire and can I camp? And was told, no, you can't have a fire, and you can only camp in the designated areas where other people camp and this and that. So there was absolutely no acknowledgement of the rights of Indigenous peoples within those regulations with parks and wildlife and the law, even though there was a sign there saying we acknowledge this is Aboriginal land. So, there's a lot of kind of things like that declaration that theoretically provide, this kind of fundamental rights to Indigenous peoples. But unless the, authorities, within Australia, whether it's governments or, the bureaucrats are kind of paying attention and following them, it doesn't happen, So they kind of just sit in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. I would loosely coin that as it's a bit of a catchphrase that's been going around over the last few years as a virtue signaling.
Yeah. Tokenism. Yeah.
Tokenism. Yeah. Thanks, mate. Thanks, Loretta. Okay, so one thing I wanted to do was to get to someone that got in early. Graham Swinsberg asked a question. He's a yes voter, and I can see also that Tim put his hand up and Britt put a hand up. And then we'll just take it from there. And I want to flag also that this is experimental. This is the first ever Fireside podcast, and I've allocated half an hour for Q&A, but I think we need a little bit more because it's such a good conversation. And so I think we'll stretch it a little bit, maybe 15 minutes, and always open to feedback for the next one because, I don't know how to do this perfectly. We're just giving it a crack. So Graham Swinsberg, thanks heaps, mate, for coming forward. And what Graham has said is that he said, my understanding is that the TAC, the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, that's Adam's mob, walked out of the Uluru Statement of the Heart gathering in 2017. Question, was this walkout a protest at not agreeing with the full or part of the statement? And maybe I'll just throw that to you first, Adam, and because there's another part of it, and that will determine what happens in the next bit.
Yeah, I can answer that, but at the same time, I can't answer that.
Yeah, you went.
Look, it wasn't. There was people. There was Palawa mob that went up to that meeting, and my understanding was that some people left, and I wasn't there, and some people stayed, and there was, and I'm not even really sure what it was about. But look, I think, from my observation, I think that our community generally agrees with the principles within the statement. I don't think. Look, I wasn't there. I'm not sure what happened, to be honest.
Sure.
And I know some people left, but I can tell you this: it wasn't the TAC that left. There was just some individuals that left.
Okay.
It wasn't
a group walkout.
No, it definitely wasn't that.
Okay. He goes on to say, if it was the part of the statement being the voice component only, do you consider having a state-based treaty over having a voice in the Constitution a better alternative? Which I kind of think that you've already answered that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Would any sort of treaty over a advisory body that does nothing? Yes.
Yeah. And so he then goes on to ask the next part of the question. It's a great question. If a state-based treaty is your direction of choice over a constitutional voice, how does that support other state-based treaties with unsupportive state governments? That's an excellent question. What do you reckon?
Well, when we talk about a treaty, it's not necessarily a state-based treaty. It could be a federal treaty. So, it's kind of open. I know a federal treaty, I think, based on what I understand about, federal versus state, is a federal treaty would override anything from the state. So, I think maybe a federal one would be okay, but it's kind of, again, it's like a one size fits all, isn't it? Some groups and some communities around Australia might have very different ideas about what a treaty means to them.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought might be a reality there, say if Tasmania at a state-based legislation flipped to treaty and a whole bunch of stuff happened, it could have a magnetic effect on governments recognizing that there's community demand, a community wish for that treaty, and that it's if it was a positive outcome, so it could have like a bit of a domino effect. Who knows?
I think that the general principles of a treaty and what I've seen proposed as elements of a treaty, I can't imagine there'd be many people would oppose to it. So you've got, a share of the resources. I can't imagine anyone would be knocking that back. You've got all Crown lands returned to the Aboriginal people. So who's going to knock that back? And then you've got some sort of representation in the political system. Some people might have an issue with that, and I can understand that. So some people might, say, well, how could we ever get a fair deal in a white system? And as a sovereign people, how can we truly be represented in a white system? And I think in a way it is a compromise, having seats in Parliament. I think it's kind of, it is in a way a compromise of being, completely sovereign. And but it's a compromise that's kind of practical, I suppose. When you get into the whole sovereignty debate, it's quite complex. But the High Australia has not recognised Aboriginal sovereignty, and we have never ceded our sovereignty. So we're in this weird limbo position on that. So I think in the kind of compromise that's been presented is to have seats in Parliament and representation, state and federally. Because when the overwhelming majority of the population is non-Aboriginal, how can Aboriginal people really have a fair representation unless there's these kind of concessions made for designated seats?
Yeah. Okay. Super complex. That's a big rabbit hole. I wanted to go to Tim.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I'll start. I know we're talking mostly about the voice, and I suppose I'll start by saying it was simple for me in a way to vote no, because that's what my mob were telling me, and so I didn't have to put the intellectual energy into it. It was something that has to do with Aboriginal community, and therefore I could be guided simply that way. But I will say that the concept of a voice presupposes that somebody's listening, and it would appear my experience has been that actually people aren't really listening. It's almost like we're saying that we will listen if you support this, but we're not quite ready to listen until we formulate this voice. So I suppose that was, it might be a little bit of trickery to put it that way, but nonetheless, that was enough to convince me that there's absolutely no point voting for this. There was, and I think that the progressive no really was above yes or no, really. It was something that had risen above this very base decision that was being presented to us. I'm going to try and put this into a question because I know that this is a question session. We don't have shared stories like the Aboriginal community does, and I see that that's something that binds any community together. And I see that in some ways that is what you're trying to build with the Fireside, and the work that you do. So I suppose my question there is, how can we develop those shared stories to the point where we won't have such a divisive issue in the future? So I suppose it's more a question for you than for Adam in a way.
Oh wow! There you go.
Even though I think that's what I've learned from the Aboriginal community is to listen and not to have an opinion always.
Yeah, totally, mate. Okay, cool. I think that's really cool. I wasn't expecting that, but that's awesome. So how do I now bring me back up? I seem to have disappeared from the screen somehow.
I can see you.
Oh, can you? I just can't see me.
Yeah.
I might just go gallery and then go speaker. All right, now I'll go back. There we go. Oh no, then it's on you. Maybe if you just mute yourself there, mate. We'll go gallery.
Okay.
Me. So you're asking, how do we share how do we kind of effectively, what I hear you asking is like, how do we emulate the wisdom of Aboriginal culture? Like in a culture that doesn't have, in the Tasmanian context, at least 45,000 years of occupation, 2,000 generations. In the Australian context, maybe a little bit more than that, and maybe a lot more than that, who really knows? So yeah, Fireside, I reckon, is my creative response to that. And And here's the thing, I had this conversation with Adam today, and I'm going down the rabbit hole a little bit here, but I didn't expect a question to me, and I'm not a talented person at making a long story short, but I'll give it a damn good crack. That when we go into the wild, and I've spent probably a lot more time than most humans on this island in genuinely wild place, maybe going on a couple of thousand nights or something, 24 years of hundreds of expeditions, week long, 10 days, etc., etc. The wild changes my identity. It changes my identity from a place of my identity being oriented around me and what developmental psychology looks at as egocentrism. And now we have lingo around what it changes it to. It changes it to ecocentrism. So that my viewpoint is as vast as the landscape itself. Like if I open myself to a wild place for a period of time, and the reason that I go into wild place in a contemplative way with men is to get them to spend 5 days by themselves, not to get them to sit and listen to me. And my job is to get culture into nature so that they can go to the guru. And that's not me, that's the place. And what nature does is disarm our nervous system to the degree that the space that's holding the complexity of ecology out there, wildness for me is basically spaciousness holding complexity. Space holding complexity. And the universal truth is that I am that as well. This body sits in space, and all of these complex thoughts and neural pathways and emotional systems and nervous system and somatic complexity all sits inside space. And when I go into the wild, it transforms my nervous system by me co-regulating with the place, and I depart far more spacious. And that's what Aboriginal culture is. Aboriginal culture is deeply spacious and still. I just went and spent a whole bunch of time in Arnhem Land, and it's just a totally different world. These people sit and they're just silent a lot, like you were saying, Tim. And an Aboriginal culture inherently embodies a sense of internal cultivated space. And so I see the art, my purpose is to be a bridge between nature and culture. And the reason for that is to bring space back into culture. Because what we're getting is this like collapse, I see cancel culture as a collapse of spaciousness. We can't hold diverse viewpoints. It's misinformation. It's rubbish. That's all bullshit. The antidote for, that's my view, the antidote for misinformation is more information. Not freaking shutting people down. It runs the risk of extraordinary authoritarianism, and history has proven that again and again and again. I can't believe we're here. So that frustrates the shit out of me, to be honest with you. But I feel like bringing space into culture in whatever form you can do it, like Adam in that wicked Queenstown art festival was doing that. He was bringing, and all the people that were involved in that were bringing spaciousness into culture. The Mona stuff is bringing spaciousness. People who are doing massage, people who are doing yoga classes, people who are having running podcasts and welcoming kind of diverse viewpoint, otherwise what's coined as heterodox thinking. All of that's about bringing spaciousness. And the one underpinning thing that I feel that really binds us, mate, is nature. The thing that no one sort of goes, oh, I don't believe in. I've never heard someone say, I don't believe in nature. Well, nature believes in you. So that's the principle. And I could talk about it for an hour or two straight in that quiz. It's a brilliant question, mate. And maybe there's another podcast in that. And I don't want to take too much more time, but that's awesome. Thank you so much, man. I'm aware that Britt also had a question, and throwing over to you, Britt, asking you to unmute.
Thank you. I feel like much of my question was already answered. I was a non-voter. I decided not to vote at all. I didn't agree with the referendum in the way that it was done. I didn't agree with being asked to vote on First Nations issue, things that mattered to the community as a non-Aboriginal person. And especially when I learnt the fine was like $20, I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to vote. Which was interesting because that information wasn't even available either. But the reason among many that I decided not to vote and invest my energy was I just couldn't get behind the idea of what I believe to be a kind of palatable version of assimilation, another form of assimilation of Aboriginal people into a white system. And it just seemed like history repeating itself. And that form of assimilation didn't actually have any value because of the advisory board was non-binding. So it seemed like a very weak attempt and very uninspiring to me. And so as a very, very strong and passionate advocate for treaty, it just it didn't captivate me. And I'd much rather put my energy towards a treaty or just doing those kind of acting those values in my own life. But the thing that I don't know as well the ins and outs of exactly obviously what different communities want for a treaty, but in my very basic understanding, a treaty recognises the sovereignty of two parties coming together to create an agreement with respect and acknowledgement of each other's sovereignty. And so you've already mentioned some of the details. So I feel like you might be repeating yourself, but maybe I could ask you personally, if that is something meaningful that we can work towards, and I hope that we can, what would that meaningful recognition of sovereignty look like in a treaty? You've mentioned some of the things, but I feel like, again, I'm not looking for a version of that assimilation of like, how do we fit Aboriginal people into the colonial system? And instead it's like, how do we actually hold that level of diversity and recognize there are two sovereign communities here, and how can we come to it, respect and agree each other's sovereignty? For me, that would be a meaningful treaty, but I'd love to hear your opinion on what that would look like.
Yeah, well, you know, that is the kind of principle of a treaty. You're right, Britt. And I suppose, you know, you've got to have both sides, you know, at the table for the start. And we have been standing at that table for a long time, you know, at an empty table. There's been some attempts, you know, like I know the Victorians, you know, the Premier had kind of given so much kind of so many resources for people to start kind of talking about treaty and to start, I guess, you know, creating awareness in the community and trying to articulate exactly what people wanted in a treaty. And in some ways, that's kind of been the difficult part, to be able to do that. And it's taken some, you know, people with some, you know, very intelligent thinking to be able to articulate those things, because it's not an easy thing. You know, it's a settlement, isn't it? It's almost like a final settlement, a treaty. And I think of it as like a kind of living thing as well. So, you know, you've kind of got to get it right. And I mean, you can look to other countries that have had treaties, in Canada and New Zealand, and how that's worked for them and what hasn't worked. So, you know, there's kind of precedence there. But as in terms of like respecting sovereignty, you know, like I said, our sovereignty is not recognised by the Australian High Court, and I guess we don't really recognise, you know, the sovereignty of the invading power, but it's there and it exists, and it's, you know, it's a barrier. So, you know, I guess. Yeah, I know. If Australia is going to recognise our sovereignty, then we accept that, you know, the Europeans and Australians here to stay, and yeah, we come up with a solution, which is a treaty, and it's a negotiation, isn't it? You know, we'll present what we want, and there'll be you know, they'll knock it back, and it's a negotiation, and that's how I see it progressing. But, both parties have to be at the table first. And so that's what we need. We need leadership. We've got leadership on our side. We've got people who will try and derail it. I mean, what would Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine say? You heard their comments about, a voice to Parliament being divisive and creating segregation. What are they going to say about a treaty? So it's a battle. It's going to be a battle, but it's worth pursuing. Absolutely.
Awesome. I'm mindful that we're moving on in time. I know that who else have we got in the space? Is Stephen in the space? Stephen Cole, because he did throw out a question on the chat. I think he's tapped. So I'm gonna throw it over to Tiff, and what I'm going to ask Tiff is that you make a very succinct question, because I want to wrap it up with a question to Adam before we tap out. But if you could get as succinctly to the question bit as you can, then that would be fantastic, because I've also got somewhere I really need to be. But throw it over to you.
I think you're speaking to the wrong person, but
I struggle with that same thing. Do the best you can.
I'll try. Thanks, Darvis. Thank you. So yeah, I guess my question revolves around why. This might be a really basic or a stupid question, I don't know, but it revolves around why you think that the government was pushing so hard for the yes, and also if you could comment on the fact that I imagine you're aware, in South Australia, the Labor government, the current government, have put in place our own South Australian version of the voice, like irrespective of the no vote the other day. And I don't really know much about the structure or makeup of that, whether it's a state version of what the federal proposition was exactly or slightly different. But that kind of concerns me, because it's sort of gone ahead and it feels like the nation's voted no and South Australia voted no. But, if the government's taken it in their own hands to just go ahead with anyway, I guess I'm a bit concerned about that. But yeah, so those two questions, or two parts of the one question, would be great if you could answer them. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Tiff.
First part of your question, I've kind of lost it. What was the first part again, just quickly?
It was like, why do you think the government was pushing so hard for a yes vote? Because that immediately got my guiles up. Is that a word? I also abstained from voting because I didn't feel engaged in the process. Like I just didn't feel like I should be engaged in the process, but I felt sort of, it immediately made me feel a bit sick, the whole thing.
I mean, I can't speak for the Australian government, but I mean, my understanding is that they're pushing so hard for it because they wanted to make it look like they were doing something for Aboriginal people. And I mean, we're always kind of pushing our interests and stuff like that. And I guess they found a way to make it look like they were doing something for us, but at the same time, they're not relinquishing any power. So that's why I think they pushed that agenda. Like, that's why they didn't choose a treaty. That's why they made the voice advisory only, because it looks like we're doing something for Aboriginal people, but at the same time, it doesn't, we're not bound by their advice or anything like that. So yeah, I think there was some good intent in a way on their part. And as for Adelaide, having their own voice, that's up to them. At the end of the day, we've all Aboriginal people have a voice, and we're entitled to use it. And we can use it. We do. We don't need, a middle person. But if the if the people, the Aboriginal people of South Australia wish to do that in their own state, then that's up to them.
Well, the South Australian Labor government have legislated a voice to Parliament in South Australia.
Okay.
Recently. Yeah.
Well, that might be
I
an
reckon
interesting
we'll probably leave that one, because it's that goes down. That's another Fireside podcast, I reckon, because then it goes, we get right into the weeds. It's such a bloody complex thing. But thank you. That was an awesome question, Tiff.
Yep.
And I think you were very succinct, much more succinct than me. So I wanted to say that anyone that didn't get any questions, I know that some people threw some comments out in the chats, and to be honest with you, I don't even know how to navigate that thing. So maybe I'll just press the button. So I want to say that this is going to be posted on Fireside, and I'll throw the video into Fireside, and anyone that didn't get a question in, please throw it out once it gets posted. And then the conversation can continue. I'm super open to take feedback in terms of how to improve this. I'm definitely on my L's in terms of setting up podcast and managing questions and all of that sort of stuff. So just having a crack, it's my mantra, just having a crack. And but before we tap out, I'm going to throw a final question to Adam, and it's a question that I feel like I'm going to throw to everyone that comes on the podcast. Is a question that's really dear to my heart, and that question to you, mate, is what are your thoughts in regard to, this is the Fireside podcast, and Fireside is the hearth of nature culture, and we've done that very strategically. Our goal is to bridge nature and culture. What are your thoughts on how to achieve that? How do we, and what does that mean to you? Number one, what does that mean to you, and how do you think we achieve bridging nature and culture?
Yeah, okay, I can answer that. I've been thinking about this today, and I was kind of thinking, like, it's a kind of privileged position to come from, isn't it? To be able to ponder or contemplate, to have the headspace to be able to go, how do we bridge nature and culture? And I was thinking, are the people in Israel and Palestine thinking about how they can bridge nature and culture? Are the Aboriginal people in my community who are struggling, doing it tough, trying to prevent welfare from taking their kids, do they have the headspace to think about how do we bridge nature and culture? And I'm thinking, they don't. It's a kind of, it's a concept that's, you have to have the kind of the freedom and the privilege to be able to contemplate and think about that. So I think in the first instance, I think people need to be able to escape crisis, because I've had a health crisis, and I've had problems in my life in the past, like most of us have. And you're very much just thinking inwardly about your health and yourself in those circumstances. So if we want to kind of be able to I guess encourage or facilitate this thought process about bridging nature and culture, I think the first thing people have to do is be able to think outwardly and beyond their lives and their health crises and things like that. So as a people, I guess we need to prevent crisis in the world and to bring people along into that space where they have the privilege and the time to be able to even to think about that. And that's my answer to that. I think we need to help other people, bring them out of that crisis mode and elevate their thinking to a higher level. Yeah.
I love it, man. I absolutely love it. And there's another podcast in that. That's brilliant, though. It's so poignant, mate. Number one, I want to thank you for making the time out of your busy schedule. I know that you're super busy to step into this space, and for becoming stepping into the Fireside mob in the first place, and believing in this as an idea. And it's really meaningful to me personally as your mate that you're back in this space, and I love you and respect you enormously, man. And I'm so proud of you. as a bro of mine, having grown up with you and watching you thrive creatively, and the successes that you're having just bring me enormous joy, man. And I wish those successes to grow and to grow and to grow. So it's a huge, huge honor and a huge pleasure that my oldest mate is the first ever interviewee on the Fireside podcast. So just love you heaps, man, and thanks heaps for coming and sharing your story and sharing your culture.
Hey, it's been my privilege, Darvis. Thanks for having me. And I love you too. And it's been really great meeting people and answering your questions and seeing your faces in the chat. I didn't get a chance to say anything to Tim, but Tim's an old friend of mine too, and I really respect Tim and all the advocacy he does for our community and just unconditional support. So thanks, Tim. And look, this has been great. I'd love, you made a couple of points about Aboriginality, and I would have loved to have engaged in that conversation, because if if you ever want to have a fireside chat about Aboriginality and kind of break that open for
awesome.
everyone to kind of get an understanding from an Aboriginal perspective, I'd love to.
Yeah.
There's no place we can't go on that. There's no wrong questions. I'd love to have a good, let's break that down sometime in another episode or something.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing idea, mate, and I'm completely into that. All those in favor, if you want to bring your cameras up, just say aye, raise your hands. Yo. And just inviting Deanne and Kathleen, if you feel to jump on right now, because before we wrap up, part of the Fireside tradition that we've developed, and it's just evolved over time, is that before we say farewell, rather than just saying, yeah, see you later, like a Looney Tunes thing, and clicking end, inviting us to acknowledge that these people have made time. These people have made space, not war. Thanks, Deanne. And if Kathleen's there, Kathleen might be asleep by now. But if you're there, Julie, inviting us all to have a gaze at our social ecology. Quite often we externalize responsibility for the way that we want the world to be to elected representatives. And I think that's a really terrible idea. I see leaders in each and every one of these people that has taken space, made space, forged space in a busy life. Every one of these people is going through their own life challenges, and we have no idea what they are. And so the heart and soul of the Fireside is oriented around making space for community, making sanctuary that welcomes diverse viewpoint, but also welcomes the human heart. Because as a little final piece, I'm actually in Wollongong right now. And where I'm about to depart to is my dear friend, Johnny Mulang, is dying of pancreas cancer. And he's right now in his last days. Maybe he has a day, maybe he dies tonight. So I've taken time away from him, and he's one of my closest friends on this earth. And I feel quite vulnerable even saying that, because I've been crying my heart out for days, and we all have as a band of brothers and family around this man. And what I can say is the value of creating sanctuary in this world is so remarkable. And it's so rare that it's achieved in an online capacity, but we can do it here. A little bit like Tim said, just making space, staring into the eyes of these humans and acknowledging them. Who knows what they're going through? And as a little gesture, the way that we've finished that, a way that you can show that sense of solidarity for your fellow humans, one of the things that we've started to do is to place one hand on your heart and one hand reaching out to the community here. This is one of those things that's just emerged as a little practice. It's my way of saying I see you. To the degree that I can, I see this human being on the other side of the screen with all of their challenges. It's my way of saying thank you for making space, not war. It's my way of giving my love to you. My way of sharing my love. Make space, not war, good people. Super appreciate you. Thanks for coming. And please, if you believe in this, then walk it and share it around. Invite people to this space. Please bring forward ideas of people that you'd like to come into these conversations and disarm polarization in this world, because we ain't heading in a good direction. And it's going to be us that leads us in another direction. It's me. It's on my shoulders. It's on your shoulders. All right, people, much love. Thanks heaps for coming. Thanks, brother. Love you heaps, man. Appreciate
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Yeah, I'll post this out to the Fireside group.
Thanks,
Sweet
Adam.
dreams.
Thanks, Darvis.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
See you later.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Bye.
Darvis. Thanks,
Thank
Adam.
you so much.
See
Welcome,
ya.
guys. Ciao.